Death of a Salesman. Again, if I take that the policy of why this play, it's actually not that hard to call. This is considered certainly one of the best plays ever written by an American, in the top 3 probably, certainly the top 5. Some people have called it the best prose play ever written. And that may sound a little funny to you because you're used to plays being in prose. Prose is stuff written in sentences and paragraphs. It's what you're used to seeing when you open a book. While verse is the opposite, and that's poetry, written in lines, or song lyrics also written in lines. That's verse. And so when the greatest prose play, what does that even mean? Just aren't all plays in prose? Well, actually, no. It wasn't really till in the late 19th century that most plays were written in prose. You've seen Shakespeare, that's written in verse. The Greek plays were written in verse. As I said last time, they were sung. But that hung on through the Restoration drama of the 1600s and in France and in England, and as new a play as Cyrano de Bergerac, which is a very popular French play from the 1800s, verse. And that by itself is interesting because, most of us think, well, people don't talk in verse, so why would you write a play in it? The thing about writing in verse is that it adds an extra music. And poetry I've once defined for people as the attempt to work the overlap between language and music. Language, because it's done with sound, has a musical component. And you know this from rap, okay? Rap goes after the musical aspects of language. Rhyme is an obvious one, but also things like alliteration and meter, which is another word for rhythm, basically, the drum line of it. And so verse brings out adds a musical component to what's going on. And that makes it sort of heightened language. Now, because it's heightened, it's not as realistic. But because it's heightened, it can be more powerful emotionally. Okay? So that's the trade-off between verse and prose if you're going to be writing a play. And the playwright where we can really see this pivot is Henrik Ibsen, great Norwegian playwright, who started out his career writing plays in verse and wrote some great ones, and then switched over to prose. And most of his plays that are produced now are the prose plays. And Ibsen said he switched to prose because he wanted to stop writing in the language of the gods and start writing in the language of men. I always found that a very interesting remark. If you're writing in the language of men, then the characters are more on our level. If you're writing in the language of the gods, the characters are inherently above us. And the classical tragedy, like you find in the Greeks and like you find in Shakespeare, is about people who are above us. And one reason why what happens to them seems like such a big deal is that if these godlike people can fall, then no one is safe. When you get to Death of a Salesman, you are not writing about somebody who's above us. He's a salesman. He lives in Brooklyn in a little house. He has money trouble. He has a wife and 2 sons. He has bad problems with one of the sons. And he's also he's in his 60s. He's having trouble in his job, and he's having trouble, it seems, with his mind. These are all ordinary people kinds of problems. They're different from the kinds of problems that Oedipus has, or that Hamlet has, or that King Lear has, or Macbeth, or Othello, or Antigone. Those are all people who are above us, and their problems are above us, though they overlap with our problems. Death of a Salesman is somebody that who could live down the block. At one point in the play, in the movie version with Dustin Hoffman, you see Willie walking down the street talking to himself, and everybody's kind of looking at him like, oh gosh, here's somebody talking to himself. He looks kind of off. And one of my students said, next time I see an old man out on the street talking to himself, I'll think that could be Willie. And I think Arthur Miller would be pleased by that response, because it means you grow in empathy, and Willie is somebody you could meet. Arthur Miller said that he had countless viewers of his play who told him that Willie was their father. Nobody really says that to you about Oedipus. So the comment was made that this might be the greatest prose play ever written because they wanted to take Shakespeare and the Greeks out of the competition. I don't know if I believe that or not, but it's good. I mean, I don't have any doubt that this is good, and it's emotionally powerful for most of my students too. I mean, this isn't as hard as Oedipus because it's not as culturally distant. It was written in the United States a few years after World War II, which to you guys seems like a long time ago, but compared to Shakespeare the Greeks is yesterday. The characters speak American English and have American problems. And you could very much say that this play is about the American dream, which is something we all share. Whether we like it or not, it's part of us. So that's why this play, all right? The things that make it hard, most of the stuff doesn't make it hard. The subject matter and the language aren't troubling for most students. The thing that most people get confused by are the time shifts. Sometimes it seems that it's all happening in the present when the two sons are in their 30s, okay? And then all of a sudden, the two sons are in high school. And then you go back and forth and you're going back and forth between present and past. And sometimes people get confused by that. I think it's less confusing on the stage because if you're putting the play on, you can do things with lighting to show. And when the light changes, oh, wait, there's a flashback. They're doing flashbacks the way they do them in the movies, right? And you're used to that. And usually when you see a flashback in the movies, it's lit kind of differently. They give you little visual cues. So you go, oh, okay, flashback. That's harder to do on the page when you're reading the play, though it wouldn't be on stage. But he's going back and forth between present and past, and that's not a random thing. It's all happening inside of Willie's head. And that's a sign of what's happening to Willie, because something bad is happening in his mind. Something is breaking down. And part of that is he'll find himself back in the past when it's socially inappropriate. And he'll start talking to dead people when someone living is in the room with him playing cards. And that's how the people around him know that Willie's in trouble. Willie, in many ways, is a man fighting a desperate struggle with his memories. And that's a lot of the dramatic tension of the play. So when you go back and forth between present and past, that's what's going on. We're caught up in Willie's struggle. Okay, the other most confusing thing that happens is there's a certain place in the first act where they talk about a dimple on the gas pipe and a rubber hose. And it's like, what? What does all that mean? What that is a potential way of committing suicide. My mother sometimes used the expression, taking the gas pipe. If that happened to me, I think I'd take the gas pipe. And that was from her generation, a phrase for the way we might say it. If that happened to me, I'd hang myself, right? Because if you inhale gas, from the gas feed into your house, you can kill yourself the same way as if you stick your head in the oven or if you inhale carbon monoxide in a car or something like that. Okay, so when that stuff comes up, the dimple in the gas pipe was something that was added, and we know that Willie's handy, so it makes sense to say that he added it. And the rubber hose is what you'd attach to the dimple if you were going to attempt suicide in that way. So that's what they're talking about with that. And that's why the rubber hose is this tangible thread. Okay. All right. So just so you know that. I think I'll leave it at that. We'll end up talking about other stuff in class. I think that's enough to get you going. All right. See you later.